Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I always learn something when I hear from my friend, Professor Bishop. It has been staggering to hear the testimony over the last several years as to what has gone on in our border. We used to be a law and order country where the law meant something. But we've seen that eroded. I hear our Democratic friends before Mr. Bishop spoke, speaking of selling our birthright. And I enjoyed hearing them talk about how, you know what, we ought to use our energy in this country. Well, welcome to the Republican position. That was great to hear. That's just fabulous to hear our Democratic friends, because as we know, one of the things that Mr. Bishop pointed out, there have been regulations and government bureaucracy used to not only prevent us from enforcing our immigration laws, but also to prevent us from utilizing our own resources over and over and over. For heaven's sake, somebody's got 800 safety violations like BP had, prohibit them from drilling, but don't prohibit everybody from drilling. The things that the government should be allowing entities to do, like providing the energy that we have, we got more energy than any country in the world. So, relative to size of other countries, we're not the biggest, but we have more natural resources than any other country in the world has been blessed with. It's amazing. But to have this administration, and even before this administration, our Democratic friends prohibiting through bureaucracies, through laws passed, our using our own energy has been just an outrage. It's the poor single moms, those struggling to make it through the month with what's left on the limits of their credit card so they can still buy gas so they can. He didn't see that as a problem for the Constitution's prohibition against establishment of religion, but he certainly would never have dreamed of prohibiting any Christian from practicing their religion, as this administration has now done and attempted to do, or the freedom of the press. We know the press is free to slant the news however they wish. For example, when gas prices were going up in 2008, the mainstream press, mainstream media, had 4-to-1 more stories about the price of gas going up then than they do now, and the prices now are higher than they were then. Gee, could it be that the mainstream media has a vested interest in keeping the president that they put in office, keeping him there? But they've got that freedom of the press. They can keep slanting their stories as they wish. Or the right of the people to peaceably assemble, or peaceable to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. First Amendment, that's it. Well, there is a great big grievance that a majority of Americans have, and it's with the president's health care bill. It's front and back. It's very thin paper, so you could get all the pages, all of the president's Obamacare in here. This says 2,407 pages. And there you are, the president's health care bill. It's interesting. Here's a story from Edward White, filed February 16th. Maybe from our friends ACLJ. But it points out last month, DOJ again argued that the penalty is a tax, talking about the penalty in the health care bill, is a tax when it filed its opening brief with the Supreme Court in Obamacare case. Court will consider this March. Well, we know February 16th, in response to a question from the great Representative Scott Garrett of New Jersey, he asked Director Zients whether the individual mandate penalty for failing to buy health care is a tax. Zients answered that it is not a tax. Today, we had Secretary Sebelius, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, that is overseeing the implementation of Obamacare. Secretary Sebelius also indicated it's not a tax. Yet, the DOJ has argued basically that the minimum coverage positions are well within Congress's commerce power. The DOJ contends that Congress has broad power under the Commerce Clause and the necessary and proper clause to enact economic regulation. The DOJ contends the minimum coverage provision is an integral part of a comprehensive scheme of economic regulation, and the provision itself regulates the economic conduct with a substantial effect on interstate commerce. It certainly has had an effect on interstate commerce. It's doggone near killing it. The minimum coverage provision is independently authorized by Congress's taxing power, contingent of the DOJ. DOJ argues the provision operates as a tax law. Validity of an assessment under Congress's taxing power does not depend on whether it's denominated a tax. But anyway, interesting time. That's from National Law Review, that assessment. And today, the question to Secretary Sebelius, and she disagrees with DOJ as well. There are just a number of issues here with this bill. And the recent demand by the administration that the Catholic Church, Catholic hospitals, provide free contraceptives was not about contraceptives. Anybody needs contraceptives can get them. It's not an issue. Shouldn't be. People that want them can get them. It's not an issue, although some are trying to make it out to be. It's about the prohibition of the free exercise of religion. Incredible that a White House would decide they get to tell the Catholic Church which parts of their religious beliefs that this White House will allow them to practice. And even coming back after the White House had all these people come in, meet and decide, discuss, they should have come back and said, sorry, you were right. We never intended to indicate we had the power to tell you you could not practice your religious beliefs. It's not what the White House came back and said. The White House came back and said, in effect, well, we still obviously have the power to tell you what parts of your religion you cannot practice. But listen, Catholic Church, we're going to do you a favor. Even though we have the power to prohibit you from practicing your religious beliefs, we're going to require the insurance companies to provide this feature, even though it goes against your religious beliefs. We'll require the insurance companies to provide that. Now, how stupid do you have to be to not understand that when a requirement of an insurance company policy is dictated by the government, there is going to have to be a recouping of that expense from the people that buy those insurance policies. So there was no remedy. The church, the Catholic hospital, were still going to have to provide those policies that provided that. They just weren't going to be required to tell the insurance companies to do that because the government did it for them. What a ridiculous end run to do the same thing. But the White House did not even address a real core issue. Now, I'm a Baptist, and I don't have the same beliefs about contraceptives, but this is so dangerous. This is such a violation of our First Amendment. For this White House to think for a moment they have the authority to tell any religious group, and here's the kicker, any religious person, that they cannot practice an important tenet of their religious beliefs is unconscionable. You know, administration say, "Oh, Catholic Church, Catholic hospital, we'll work with you here." What about Catholic individuals who believe with all their heart the things that are taught by Catholic schools, by the Catholic Church, and expounded by the Pope himself? How powerful a pope does the White House or the president, any president, have to be to dictate that what the Pope says is not going to be observed in America by any individuals who are here in the United States? Hadn't heard a lot of discussion about the freedom of the individuals, but this was not talking about the freedom of the church or a hospital. It was talking about the freedom of individuals. And even if the White House tries to accommodate some hospital, some church, out the beliefs of an individual, a Catholic in America who's told, sorry, this president is going to trump your Pope, and you're going to have to pay for what you believe is against your religious beliefs. It's unconscionable. Unconscionable. Think the founders would have put up with that? As Dennis Miller said, they were willing to go to war and die and risk everything over a tax on their breakfast drink. You think they wouldn't be willing to fight for their right to practice their religious beliefs? Good grief, they came. So many of the early settlers came here to get away from the prejudice and discrimination against Christian beliefs. Protestants, Catholics, they came to America hoping to have freedom of worship. It's been interesting to hear in Israel that the Muslims who are most free to practice their Islamic beliefs as they feel led to are actually in Israel. Because depending on which administration is in charge in Iran, Syria, Egypt, wherever, you better not get too far afield from what the administration of that country believes. Here in America, people are free to practice Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, atheism, so long as it does not threaten this nation as a whole. We were told by the president there was no chance any federal money would ever go for abortion. And some of our friends actually bought into that representation. Turns out wasn't true. Some of us tried to explain back then. You can't bind with an executive order what the law says specifically. It sets out requirements for health care providers, clinics, insurance policies, and there are those that will provide abortions, and ultimately there will be tax dollars, since dollars are fungible, that will be used for abortions under Obamacare. We keep coming back to this. If Obamacare is constitutional and the mandates in Obamacare are constitutional, there is nothing the federal government cannot dictate. As I've said from here many times, this Obamacare, 2,407 pages, was about the GRE. It's what it's all about. This bill is about the GRE, the government running everything. Because if the government has the right to control everyone's health care in America, they do have the right then to tell your children what they can or can't eat, to tell your children that their parents or parent fit because they don't know how to feed a child because it disagrees with what the government says. They have the right to tell you what you can put in a vending machine. They have a right to tell you whether or not you're exercising enough. They have a right to tell you you use too much butter when you should have used something else in cooking. They have a right to do that if they have a right to control your health care. If this is constitutional, the government has a right to tell every Supreme Court justice how they can live. And if any Supreme Court justice thinks they'll be immune from this government telling them how they can live, what they can eat, what they can do, what they cannot do, then they are amusing themselves frivolously, because that day will be coming. And sure, this administration knows they stacked the deck with Justice Kagan. Of course, anybody that send an email all excited about having the votes to pass Obamacare, how wonderful that is, just amazing. We keep wondering how many emails have not been provided. The noble thing would be to recuse oneself. And we should have known when liberal groups that want the government to control everybody's lives were so adamant throwing stones at Justice Thomas, it was clear. We've seen this method before. What that means is they were nervous about somebody else who was a shoo-in to vote for the president to have that issue raised about them. That's the way they always do. So as soon as I saw these ridiculous allegations about Justice Thomas because his wife had an opinion, wait, didn't see any liberals screaming about somebody with the ACLU whose husband had taken strong positions on different issues, that she wasn't qualified because, or should recuse herself because her husband had an opinion. But some of these same liberals, so-called, took that position. Gee, if Clarence Thomas's wife has a position, he must be disqualified. The hypocrisy goes on and on. Hopefully Justice Kagan will tell us all of the emails, allow us to see all of the emails that were sent, all of the consultations in which she was a part. Then we'll see the truth. This This bill required the spending of $105 billion at a time we didn't have $105 billion. We're having to borrow over 42, 43, 44 billion of that from other places, including China. China doesn't mind seeing this happen. I think they realize it'll help bring down this nation financially. The president said it would cost less than $1 trillion to implement. Well, the first CBO score came back over $1 trillion. CBO called over the White House. He comes back, says, you know, it's more like $800 billion. Then once it gets in place, said, you know what? We had a mathematical error or two. It's actually over $1 trillion. That's why CBO deserves to have a plus or minus error, margin of error of 25% plus or minus. We keep coming back to this one thing. This bill is not nearly as much about health care as it is the government running everything, running individual lives. Sam Adams, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, those who gave their lives for our freedoms would never have stood for this. The government running everything. But it's true. If the government can do this, if the federal government can do this, there is nothing that is closed to the government's direction and law. If the government has the right to direct everyone's health care, then this opens the bedroom to federal government jurisdiction like nothing ever has. Not immediately, but eventually. Is that what people want? You want the federal government being able to say, this practice is okay, this one in the bedroom is not okay. Because, see, we're in charge of your health care, and we've seen that it ends up costing more, this, that, or the other. So we're going to prohibit that. If they can direct against someone's religious beliefs, certain bedroom practices be allowed, they can direct which ones can't be. You can direct what the Catholic Church or Catholic individual has to provide or pay for. They can sure tell them what they can't engage in as well. This opens a door to the governments running everything like never before. This month marks 2 years it's been passed, against the will of the American people, against the will of most state legislatures, against the Constitution. Is it a tax? Is it not a tax? It appears this administration will say whatever it has to say to try to get this held as constitutional. And I can say unequivocally that if the Supreme Court were to hold this bill and its mandates and its intrusions into every area of personal being, they uphold that as constitutional, it will give me no satisfaction to someday say to a justice of the Supreme Court whose religious beliefs have been violated, I told you so. None. It will break many of our hearts that there was such blindness. But I have that hope that springs eternal in the human breast, that there is still enough reliance on the Constitution itself in our Supreme Court. that they will recognize the door that is open. They'll recognize the inconsistencies of this administration in trying to come up with some argument to justify these violations of our freedoms. Some say, well, states require you to have auto insurance. That's only if you're going to drive on their roads. If you're going to participate in that privilege, then yes. But nobody was required to have auto insurance if they're not going to drive a car on their highways. And in fact, the only insurance that's been required by any state mandatorily is insurance to cover someone else who might be harmed by an individual's driving and harming them. I don't know of a state that requires insurance on an individual hurting themselves while they're driving. Only liability. Now, we do have the problem in Massachusetts, where Massachusetts basically had a mandate. Other than that mandate in Massachusetts, no state has ever been able or even thought of or tried to require the purchase of a product. And you want to know, oh, it's said this is going to be for the working poor. Look, we already have Medicare, Medicaid, and until this administration, with the help of Pelosi and Leader Reid in the Senate, where they gutted $500 billion out of Medicare, until that happened, there was not going to be any damage to Medicare. We were going to take care of our seniors, take care of our poor. But you look in this bill, as I have, I've been through the whole thing. You go through here and you find out if you are just above the poverty line, you're working, you're doing everything you can to get by, to make it with your family. But you can't afford as good of insurance policy as is mandated by the federal government. This administration wants you to have an additional tax on your income, as if that's going to help. This hurts the working poor. It devastates Medicare by pitting people against our seniors, taking $500 billion away from Medicare. It's time for America to rise up again and make clear this is unconstitutional, and I think even the Supreme Court would hear that when Americans rise up and say, you're not governing every aspect of my personal life like this opens the door to doing. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back.